I heard an audio recording of hell, and now I'm hallucinating about it. It was the middle of the night when I heard it. I'd been finalizing a project on Pro Tools when an email came in from my friend Greg. The subject line was, "Let me know what you think." There was nothing in the body of the email, but there was an attachment. A WAV audio file, less than a megabyte in size, and displayed a 30-second runtime. I sent back an email asking what it was. He responded quickly, saying that's what he needed me to find out. I'm not surprised Greg emailed me about it. I'm a sound engineer and do post-work for documentaries and some low-level TV shows. I mix, design, clean up dialogue, I do Foley and score. I'm good at everything, but not great at any of them. But I also know Tor networking and frequented the deep web using multiple VPNs in a customized sound room Faraday cage I'd built myself. In the second email, Greg told me he'd been sent a file from a Reddit link, which was now gone. The subs were taken down and the spark around it quickly went out. But the file came back online and started moving through Telegram and Discord. More and more people listened to it, debating and theorizing what it was. One person managed to track the file back to the dark web, but from there, it was impossible to trace to an origin. All it had was a name. Inferno.wav. I ran the attachment through 2 full scans of antivirus software I'd modified myself. It came up clean on both, so I downloaded it and opened a visualizer of the sound waves. They were all peaking consistently. I lowered the volume so I wouldn't blow my eardrums and pressed play. The sounds started immediately, an assault on every sensor in my ear, high, low, and medium pitches. It was producing multiple Shepard tones, including in reverse, giving a dizzying, constantly swelling and decaying effect. The inside of my head felt like it was boiling, like a fever. I was unable to fully latch onto everything after the first few seconds. It was too all-consuming, like a bad mushroom trip in a room with no lights on. The darkness just guides you, and if you resist, it gets worse. It felt like it was playing for minutes, hours even. Then it finally ended. I threw my headphones off. I was overwhelmed with emotions and burst into tears. I couldn't explain why. I don't remember a single thing I heard. Like it was all immediately erased from my memory. But I felt like I was changed forever. When I calmed down, I went out back for a smoke and brought a bottle of bourbon to chase it. I felt dizzy and couldn't stand up straight. I leaned against the house and realized the sound had affected my entire ear. It wasn't just my hearing. It was also my equilibrium that was torched. My sense of balance was gone and vertigo was taking over. I had a second smoke and felt my senses and balance coming back. I could hear the rustling in the forest behind my house, dogs barking somewhere on the property next to mine, the cigarette amber burning, my own heavy breathing. I went back inside and quickly felt like a foreigner in my own home. As I entered my office, I felt like I wasn't the only one in there. I hit the power bar beside the door and my entire system shut off. When it did and the room was plunged into darkness, I saw the silhouettes of something appear against the window, on the inside of the glass, in the room. I scrambled to turn the overhead lights on, but the silhouette was gone. I didn't get a good look at it, but it looked like it had 2 spikes protruding from its forehead. I got my shotgun and slept with my bedroom door locked that night, but neither of those could protect me from what was going on in my head. The nightmares came before I was even asleep. They were horrifying and acted as all dreams do, starting without a point of origin, but continuously moving in a forward momentum. They all ended with me in a terrifying version of hell. I was drowning in lakes of boiling water as fires streaked down at me like sheets of rain, There was an unbearable heat from every direction. I crawled out of the lake onto a moving but solid layer of molten lava. My skin melted and healed at the same time. My eyes burned and mended simultaneously. The pain was excruciating and never-ending, and felt like a burn had scarred the entire inside of my body forever. I woke up in bed, covered in sweat and fevering. It was still early, just before dawn, but I wasn't going back to sleep, even though I was exhausted. I took a cold shower and watched steam come off my body as the cool water reacted with my hot skin. I checked my phone and saw 3 missed calls and a voicemail from Greg. It was urgent and panicking. Greg was seeing things he shouldn't see outside of sleep, but they were in his house, his room, following him, chasing him, attacking him. They were flashes of beings from some kind of hellish world. Greg was touched by something he described as a demon made out of a dark red mist. The touch burned Greg's arm badly. When he woke up, his arm was still burned and horribly infected. He could barely move it, and it seemed to be moving its way up to his shoulder. Greg warned me not to let them touch me. Them. Greg was convinced it was because of the audio recording. He begged me, pleaded with me to listen to the file again, to try to decipher it, figure out where it came from, search for a remedy. The message cut off halfway through one of his cries. I tried to call him back, but there was no answer. I left a message and told him to call me. I texted him the same thing. After that, I didn't know what to do. Everything felt off. I decided to make some coffee and try to divert myself from what was going on. I needed some crisp ambience from the deep woods out back for a new project I was working on. It would be simple and distracting enough. I rolled a joint to ease my nerves and to smoke on the walk. I grabbed my mic, mixer, and headphones and went out back. I have a good chunk of property in my backyard. There are some old trucks and cars, leftovers from distant relatives of the past. The realty is mostly woods and swampland, but has a few paths and trails that cut through it for four-wheeling and snowmobiling. There was a clearing just off the trails I wanted to get a recording of. The wind came in through the trees in a strange way some mornings, and I had been trying to capture it right for a few months. I made it there and was recording for about 5 minutes before everything silenced out. I snapped my fingers near the mic and heard it clearly, but the wind disappeared. No leaves rustling, animals in movement or birds chirping. It was like I was in an anechoic chamber. No direct or reflective sounds, just pure isolation. I turned up all the volume levels on my mixer, but the woods had gone still. Then a snap. Somewhere off in the forest a twig broke, and another, but this time in the other direction. Then 2, 3, 4, right after each other. Something was walking, shambling forward. I did full 360-degree turns, but there was nothing and no one out there aside from the trees. The cracks and snaps got louder, like there were dozens of feet or claws scrambling along the ground toward me. I crouched in fear, covering my head and face, and shutting my eyes as a heavy wave of wind and heat knocked against me. I kept my feet and held still, bracing for more. I waited for the sounds or breeze or heat or anything more to come at me, but they didn't come. I stood back up, opening my eyes to see the forest was dark. It had just been this morning, but somehow it was now night. The day had disappeared. I started making my way back to the path to my house, feeling more and more surrounded by unseen predators. A twig snapped somewhere behind me, and I spun to check. Deep in the woods, something was glowing, moving slowly a meter off the ground. It flickered a deep red and looked like a marshmallow on fire, floating through the woods. It was coming towards me. I froze up. A deep pit in my stomach formed, and I was brought back to childhood, to the one time my parents took us camping. As a kid, I burned my sister's face with a marshmallow I let catch fire. It wasn't intentional, obviously, just goofing around, and it turned into a bad accident. But it left a nasty scar on her cheek that I still don't think she'll ever forgive me for. The little ball of fire traveling forward through the trees looked exactly like that flaming marshmallow. I picked up my pace, finding the path and making my way back to my house. I checked over my shoulder and saw the ball of fire was still following me. My run turned to a sprint. I didn't even look over my shoulder or slow down until I was back by my door and it was slammed shut. As I caught my breath inside, I saw the ball of fire float past the window and out of sight. I checked my phone and saw more missed calls from Greg and voicemails. I listened to the first one but had to turn it off. The whole recording was Greg crying in pain and fear, begging for help. I went back upstairs to my office. Whatever we'd listened to had affected Greg in deep psychological and hallucinatory ways, and was starting to do the same to me. I turned the power bar back on and lit up my system and monitors. I sat down and drank more bourbon, though I didn't think anything could take this edge off. I put my headphones on and pressed play on the file. I was immediately thrown back to the familiar and horrified state. The sounds refound their groove in my ear again, and my muscles tensed and shut down. This time, I was remembering everything. Over the years, my ears had become so attuned to nuance, I was able to decipher everything I was hearing from the file. There were horrific, torturous cries coming from the fire, lashing and water boiling and bubbling. I could hear storms of violent nuclear thunderclaps that shot through my head like electroconvulsive therapy. Fiery rain that hit the lava-hardened ground like tiny meteors. Flames whipping against bare skin. Pain and suffering. There was something like a huge, powerful generator fueling it all that sounded like it was all very nearly about to explode. A leviathan of bass and sub-bass vibrations, shaking so strongly they were creating some kind of war drum effect. And underneath, there was a rhythm, some strange harmony under the chaos, like chanting or a prayer. Then it ended, and the world was thrown into silence and stillness. The room felt darker, and my body felt like a lead statue about to topple. I sat quietly for several minutes before I felt the world shift back on balance, and my mind wandered right back to where it was. I thought about the sounds, the screams in particular. I'd heard all kinds before. In one documentary I worked on, which followed the genocide of the Tutsis in Rwanda, I'd heard my first real death screams. There'd been new audio recordings out of some of the towns that had been slaughtered by armed militia. They were horrific. It wasn't just that you knew the screams were real. The sounds hit differently entirely. They landed somewhere deep and dark in your heart. I heard once you could tell fake screams from real ones, because the souls were trapped in the sounds of the real one, and they reached out and held you with an icy grip when you listened. This was something like that, but worse. I felt like I was suffering with the screamers. My whole body had heated, and my muscles were tensing from pressures on different parts of me, like the air in the room was flexing. I stared at the file, sitting there on my desktop between my projects and my music. Inferno.wav. My phone buzzed. I checked the screen, hoping for Greg. But it was my sister, Carly. She was crying. The family wasn't sure how it happened or why, but Greg was dead. Somehow Greg had caught fire in his room. He ran outside and jumped into the family pool. But he kept burning. It was like the water wasn't even touching him. Greg climbed out of the pool, giving up, and died in the backyard. His body was burned to a crisp. The immediate thought was suicide, but there was no sign of fuel or accelerant used. In fact, they couldn't tell how such a blazing hot fire could have erupted on his body without leaving a trail out of the house or burning a blade of grass in the field he'd collapsed in. Carly asked if I'd talked to him recently, if I'd noticed anything strange about him, if he'd mentioned any suicidal thoughts. I was in shock, but managed to offer my condolences while claiming he'd seemed fine to me, which was true. Outside of the last day or so, he was his normal goofy self. The only thing that changed was the audio file he'd listened to. I told her I'd stop by the house later to see them, and thanked her for calling to tell me. When I hung up, it all became real. I had to figure out what the file was and where it came from. I started up a program I'd created that used different audio translation filters to help with identifying languages in some of the projects I worked on. The programs measured for both pronunciation sound and grammatical shape and origin, discerning the language genesis. I was getting back some strange results. At first, I wasn't identifying anything at all. I had to restart the program twice. Then it began partially recognizing elements of words in Greek, Aramaic, Demotic, Hieratic, and Coptic. I separated the dialects, whatever they were, from everything else. The words came out in a strange, lengthy grouping. They sounded like a prayer but worked in a perfect loop, ending on the same notes as they began, which were similar to the shepherd's tone. I put the phrases through a search engine. I only received one result, which led to some back-channel website that explored ancient dead languages. The result gave me chills, claiming similarities to and including the divine language. I sent an email to the site moderator, who was a professor in philology and linguistics, with the prayer translated into a readable series of words, asking for his immediate help. As I waited for a response, I checked the Telegram chat rooms Greg mentioned. They gave me more chills. Everyone posting had been complaining about the same things as Greg experienced. Some of them were more personal. The more frightening stories described watching their friend or family member or co-worker go up in flames 2 days after listening to the audio file. They'd begin by coughing up smoke. Then their skin turned dark, like it was burning. Their insides would begin to melt. Then they'd spontaneously combust, wherever they were. I closed the chat rooms and decided to go out for a smoke. I wasn't going through the woods though, not after last time. I sat on the back edge of the yard and looked out into the woods. I looked at the few old cars in the back, rusting over. I thought about how I used to play in them. I smoked my first cigarette in one of them, first beer, first girl I made out with. They held a lot of memories. Sitting there trying to break down what was happening, all I could come up with was some sound frequency project or experiment or weapon leaked out and was unleashed and was spreading through various social media channels. I'd read about shady government programs focusing on sound waves and how they alter brain waves to suit various needs. Some needs were more malevolent than others, so this idea didn't seem far-fetched. But then there were the hallucinations, and the extreme heat I kept feeling like a fever blanket pulsing over me in waves. All of this was deeper than some Manchurian candidate trick. I knew there was one more possibility, however insane it seemed to even think. That the file was, somehow, some way, an audio recording of hell. The idea that there was a hell, let alone that someone had been there and recorded the sounds it emitted and put it online, was insane to me. But here I was. The ambience around me drained out and the burning of my cigarette was amplified. I focused on it, watching it burn. All of a sudden, there was smoke all around me. I tried to get up but was no longer on the back steps. I was in the driver's seat of the rusted Jeep out back. I was seatbelted in. Smoke was funneling through the old truck from the back seats as a deep red was glowing out from it. Something was in the back, a dark silhouette amongst the smoke. I struggled against the seatbelt, but it burned into my hands like it was made of fire. The sounds, the horrifying screaming from the depths of whatever hell was on that file, screeched out from the back seat. Then Greg's voice came from them. "I'm waiting for you, Johnny. I'm keeping your seat warm." I yanked myself forward and shot up in bed. The Jeep and the backyard were gone. I was in my room now, half under the covers, drenched in sweat. I'd been sleeping. Another nightmare had shook me. I got up. The loss of balance was back, like the world had shifted slightly and I hadn't adjusted. I could see into the hallway, which was pulsing with a deep red glow before plunging into darkness. That same levitating red ball of fire, the size of a marshmallow, floating past my doorway, moving towards the stairs down. I walked out into the hallway, the red pulse continuing to glow on and off. The fist-sized flaming ball was at the end of the hall. It moved down the stairs, disappearing onto the first floor. I followed the ball down, putting my hand on the walls to balance myself, but found the walls and the railing were perspiring. Everything was beading with sweat. The air on the first floor was thick with humidity as I walked through it. It felt like gravity was now pushing and pulling horizontally to the sides instead of vertically down. In the main entrance, I could see into the kitchen, which opened up to dual sliding back doors made of glass. They looked out onto the deck, which had a 10-foot drop down to the ground below. A figure was standing on the deck, looking down into my backyard. The figure turned back and smiled. It was me. Then it stepped over the edge of the terrace and fell. I nervously walked through the kitchen and out onto the deck. I peeked over the edge. Heat burned the face of my skin. My eyebrows curled. My mouth went dry. The pits of hell stared up at me, daring me to look away. Pain, screaming and suffering wailed from tiny bodies that looked like ants far below. But they were all people. Millions of them. A hand pressed into my back, and I felt myself go over the edge of the deck. I turned back to see who pushed me, and saw myself there, smiling. I kept hoping this was a dream, that I'd wake up during the fall into hell, but I didn't. I kept falling, and the heat got hotter. I hit the ground like a brick. I felt the hardened molten lava burn through my skin and pulverize the bones in my body as I landed. I couldn't move. I was a mushy liquid that was slowly reforming into a solid figure. I could see blurry shapes rushing towards me, horrific sounds screeching from them. Then I woke up. Or rather, I came to and fell forward out of my chair. I was still sitting in the backyard, having my cigarette. I hadn't gone to the Jeep, or woken up in bed, or fallen into hell. I was still here, and the cigarette I'd just started was just burning into the filter. I was covered in sweat. My clothes were stuck to me, and I felt like I was on fire. I rushed inside and got in the shower, running freezing water over me until my temperature started to drop. Then I started to cough up smoke. I had no idea how much time had passed since I listened to the track, and realized it could have been 2 days already. I rushed back to my office and found an email response from the professor who moderated the website. Unfortunately, he said he couldn't help a ton, as it was mostly unknown knowledge. But he'd tell me what he knew, It was a prayer referred to as a deified chant. That is, a prayer structured like a palindrome, so it could be chanted backwards as well as forwards and elicit the same message. It was used to honor or worship a deity with supreme regard. The use of a palindrome itself could be interpreted in different ways, but the main explanation for it, the spiritual one, was that a palindrome was a message from angels who were watching over you. Therefore, a palindrome could be used to call angels forth for protection. But this deified chant had one portion in the middle that wasn't part of the palindrome, and it didn't appear to be for protection. The word Hellel was detected among the chants. The word translated to hell in Hebrew. Hellel didn't work the same backwards as forwards, which made the deified chant into something else. I began coughing up huge puffs of dark smoke, and my insides felt like they were burning up. I managed to focus back on my monitor and read the final part of the email. The professor offered a simple suggestion: to play the audio recordings backwards. Everything except the one word, Hellel, would play the same, but maybe that word would change the effects. It seemed too obvious. So obvious, in fact, it might actually work. I dragged and dropped the file onto a timeline just to check. I reversed its flow and placed my headphones on nervously, and hit play. The sounds started in reverse, and I began to seizure immediately. My sight went blurry as hallucinations filled my vision, then went black. I felt like I was floating in space. No air to breathe or surfaces to touch. I didn't feel like I was a person. I felt like a spirit, an essence floating through infinity. Then a hole opened up and bright white light poured into the darkness. From the light, I saw bodies toppling over, falling into the darkness below them. The bodies were human-like, but some of them had wings which were burning away as they flew. The bodies dropped from the sky like a blazing red meteor shower. As they hurled downward, their brightness lit up the ground below them. I saw barren, scorched rock and desert, volcanoes erupting and mountains shaking. The bodies fell into large, slithering rivers of boiling water and fire. They screamed upwards towards the sky. The landscape was like a moving canvas, a biblical oil painting showing the fall from heaven, the fall of the damned, the disgraced angel stumbling down through ash and cinder clouds. From the hole in the sky they'd all been thrown from, I saw a vision of the great angels Michael and Abdiel. They were casting out the final, disgraced usurper from their midst. Lucifer, at once the brightest light in heaven, was now the great fallen angel, and he was being reborn as the devil, to rebuild his army in this new fallen kingdom. The light from above closed, and the evils and atrocities of the fallen could only be seen by the red glow of the exploding volcanoes. A horrible explosion of sound shook through the hellscape, and I felt my essence implode from its power. Then I was back, sitting in front of my monitor. I'd pissed myself and a pool of sweat had covered the floor around me. My eyes were bloodshot, and the tiny hairs in my nose had been singed away. All I could smell was them burning. Hours had passed, but I was alive. I took another shower, cleaning myself and cooling down the slight fever I still had. I started to feel better. I wasn't sure if I was in the clear and was nervous to delete the file, so I put it into a password-protected folder on an external hard drive and locked it in a small Faraday cage I'd built. I went back online and searched Telegram and Discord. The chat rooms had gone quiet. The conversations were there, even if the people who had them weren't. And the file had vanished. It wasn't circulating anywhere anymore. Inferno.wav was gone. All that was left were the ashes of people's lives and bodies that had been torched from listening to it. I performed a lengthy online reverse search for any sign of the file, but nothing came up. It completely disappeared online and hasn't reappeared. Since then, I've been trying to get my shit together. Friendships, relationships, work, health, exercise, all of it. Because the biggest lesson I took away from this whole existential nightmare was that hell is a real place. And I never want to go there.